chapter 4. We'll begin in verse 6 in just a second. Last week, I gave you some more dates to remember, and I wanted to kind of clarify something. I talk about the year 400, but that is just kind of an approximation. Some would push that date back to 425, but still, whatever, that's the date that's important there is that's when Malachi signs off, and we'll be coming back to that. So, because Malachi is going to be, he will be prophesied by Amos a little bit later on. Okay, just kind of get that straight. I wanted to be sure you understand what I was doing there. Okay, verse 6, this opening is always a kind of a delight to me, not because of the seriousness of the subject, but the way he expresses it. It's so profound, it's clever, really, if you look at it. I gave you cleanliness of teeth in all your cities. What does that mean? Well, it tells you the next part of the verse, but how clever that is. I give you cleanliness of teeth. What's he saying, see?
There's a drought. You didn't have enough to eat.
Nothing to eat. If you don't have anything to eat, your teeth don't get dirty. So isn't that kind of a clever, insightful way of the prophet saying that? It's almost, we'd say almost backhanded, because it goes right on, and lack of bread in all your places. So this is the start. Now, this is the start of a whole litany or list of things that God has done to Israel, trying to get them to wake up. Now, last week we talked about the idea that natural disasters are going to happen on earth. Okay. It's how we react to them. I mean, it's going to happen. Everybody, God sends the rain upon the just and the unjust, okay? So you can't say, well, there's a tornado and I'm a Christian, I'm just going to sit here and wave as it goes by. We're responsible sometimes to take action because we understand what we're supposed to do here. But the other thing we were saying about this is that these natural disasters often bring us closer to God because it reminds us that there's something out there greater than we are. We think we have control sometimes. We have weather satellites and we have all these different things. That's not control, people. It's nice to have the warning. That's a blessing. But it just reminds us that there's things out there greater than we are and that can do great things. And it humbles us. That's what it's supposed to bring us to the knees and say, God, you're God. I'm just a little man here. And that's what God, and all these things that he's going to talk about here, he's trying to get Israel to wake up. And not turn to their gods, their golden calves, but turn back to me. And he's going to talk about, this is one of the greatest buildups. This sermon he's got into, in verse 4, remember it says, here, this is the opening of this sermonette he gives here. Hear this. Okay. He's starting to build up here, and then he's going to end with one of the greatest verses, I think, in the book, and maybe even in the Old Testament, as a warning. Now, before I get started any further, I've got to kind of share this with you, because I think of this every time I come to this, because he's building up to this. But several years ago, and I wish now I'd had the foresight to save it, there was a cartoon in the paper of this guy walking down the street, and you know what a street prophet is, don't you? One of these characters you see parodied, he has the robes and the sandals, and he's carrying a sign, and he has the long beard, and he's carrying a sign that says what? The end is near. The end is near. So this guy's shows this guy walking down the sidewalk, and this street prophet comes by carrying a sign saying, the end is near. Well, he walks on past, and the guy keeps on going, and then another street prophet comes. And he has a little bit bigger sign that says, the end is near. But, he walks on by, and then suddenly in the next frame, you see this guy, because here comes the street prophet running at full tilt. His beard's all here, everything's flapping. And on his sign it says, here it comes. That's exactly what we're going to see here. God says, I've done this, I've done this, I've done this. Prepare to meet me face to face now. I've tried to get your attention, and it hadn't worked. So now you're going to stand before me face to face. Here it comes, Israel. So we kind of keep that in mind as we're preparing this buildup. Okay, first he says, I've given you famine, I've made you hungry, and yet you did not return to me, declares the Lord. I also withheld rain from you when there were yet 3 months to the harvest. This is the critical point when their grain was growing. They needed the rain, and God just stopped it. This is one of the major things. It's all through, I could read Deuteronomy here, Kings. Deuteronomy, interestingly enough, does give it the contrast. This is Deuteronomy 28:12. The Lord will open to you his good treasury, the heavens, to give the rain to your land in the season and to bless all the works of your hands. And you shall lend to many nations, and shall not have to borrow. That's if you're good. If you're not good, he goes on to verse 28:23, and the heavens over your head shall be bronze, and the earth under you shall be like iron. And the Lord will make the rain of your land powder. From heaven dust shall come down on you until you are destroyed. So here's your choice, Israel. If we do what God wants, blessings, showers come. If we don't, a sky of bronze and an earth of iron. And of course, the other one you could go to would be in Kings, Kings 17:1 and Kings 18:41. If you know the story, this is one of my favorite stories of the Old Testament about Elijah. And he goes up to King Ahab and says, it will not rain until I tell it to. In other words, I've got God's word, it's not going to rain. And so more than 2 years passed, and finally they get rid of the old prophets of Baal and get rid of all that and clean things up a little bit. And then Elijah, and I love this verse in the King James because he says to Ahab, get home, Ahab, because I hear the sound of abundance of rain. So if you don't get home, you're going to get wet. But I just love that expression there. I hear the sound of abundance of rain. God's now going to open it all up, and it's going to be abundant. Okay. So here's that contrast. They're experiencing that sky of bronze, that soil of iron. Just 3 months before the harvest, right at the critical moment. I would send rain on one city and send no rain on another city. One field would have rain. The other field on which it did not rain would wither. That goes tying into the other one. So 2 or 3 cities would wander to another city to drink water and would not be satisfied. Yet you did not return to me, declares the Lord. So they had to literally go searching for water among the other cities around about, and sometimes even those cities didn't have enough to give them. They barely had enough for themselves. So, and yet, again, they don't wait. Instead of turning to God, they turn to their idols. To their idols. Verse 9, I struck you with blight and mildew, your many gardens and your vineyards, your fig trees and your olive trees, the locust devoured. So most of us, sometimes I've never been able to plant much of a garden, but I know what tomato blight is, things like that. Of course, one of the most famous in the history of the world was the potato blight that hit Ireland. Many of our relatives experienced that. So he's saying again, your crops are going to be mildewed, your gardens, your vineyards are going to be, disease-ridden, and then if that doesn't get it, the locusts are going to come and get you. The locusts are going to eat you up. If you've never seen the movie or read the book, I recommend the book, the movie, old version back when, I think the 30s or 40s, of Pearl S. Buck's The Good Earth. And they have a really, for that day and time, the special effect of showing a locust plague coming is very effective. And you could almost see how people's heart would sink when they saw this huge cloud, and they knew this huge cloud of darkness was alive. It was locusts, and it was going to devour everything. It's just frightful. And yet you did not return to me, declares the Lord. I sent among you a pestilence after the manner of Egypt. We know what that means. What all the pestilence, God did to Egypt. I killed your young men with the sword and carried away your horses. I made the stench of your camp go up into your nostrils. That's a horrible idea. Again, you can go back to Deuteronomy and other places, and God warns them about this. If you don't work for me, your enemies are going to come and get you. But isn't that again, Amos is using very, to the point, very vivid, almost gut-wrenching language, is it not? I made the stench of your camp go up into your nostrils. The stench of the dead bodies of your sons and husbands. Maybe you've seen movies or whatever, and they would show after a battle the women going out and trying to find their loved one on the battlefield. What a heart-wrenching job again. And if they didn't move fast, whoever was, within a couple of days, the bodies begin to putrefy, and the stench would just be overwhelming. And yet, you did not return to me, declares the Lord. I overthrew some of you as God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. That's pretty vivid. And you were as a brand plucked out of the burning. What he's saying is, I overthrew you. I could have just consumed you down to the last ember. But I didn't. I've plucked you out. And maybe, I don't know, sometime if you had a fireplace or a fire pit or something, and maybe something fell into it. Oh my goodness, I didn't want, and you'd try to yank it out before it was consumed. So God said, I could have at that time just destroyed you then, but I tried to save you. I tried to bring you out again, hoping that this would bring you back to me. It didn't. By the way, this idea is also reflected in Jude 23, when in Jude it says that to save these people, even though they've sinned, save them as if you're pulling something out of the fire like this. So, interesting imagery. Okay, verse 12. If you haven't got this underlined, enlightened, or highlighted, or circled, or something in your Bible, you really need to have it there. And he says, therefore, thus I will do to you, O Israel, because I will do this to you. Prepare to meet your God, O Israel. If someone came up and said, prepare to meet your God right now, it's going to happen, the next day or two. Prepare.
They have a song about that.
Yeah, there's a song about that. Prepare to meet your God. That's scary. to prepare to meet justice if I don't have enough time to. And he said, I've given you opportunity after opportunity after opportunity. Now it's time to face the music. And when he says, thus I will do to you, I've done all these other things to you. I've got more. That's what he's saying. If this isn't enough, I'm going to do more. And so prepare, because it's coming, Israel. You're going to meet me one way or the other. You're going to come in contact with me.
Better be prepared.
Better be a Boy Scout. Be prepared. So, he's really lowering the boom on them here. I mean, this is a tremendous crescendo here, and the apex that he reaches at this point. He builds them up and he says, okay, bang, here, prepared to meet your God. That is so sobering, so powerful, even for us today. And so he says, and all these things we've been saying is, I want you to come back to me, but you didn't. You went to your idols. So when he says, prepare to meet your God, he gives them what God am I talking about here? Not your golden calves by any means. What you're looking at here is, for behold, he who forms the mountains and creates the wind and declares to men what is his thought, who makes the morning darkness and treads on the heights of the earth. The Lord, the God of hosts, is his name. Yahweh. That's who I'm talking about. I'm talking about the Creator God. I'm talking about the God that holds the world in his hand, holds you in his hand. He knows your thoughts. Don't worry about those golden calves. You're dealing with me. Here's the God. You better deal with this God, because he's the real God. He's the God of hosts. Okay? Any questions? Okay, now then, a new sermon here. We said that he didn't go somewhere and preach all this in one day. He had sections that he would preach along. And how were they introduced? Here. And what's the word in Hebrew? Shema. And that's how you lead off with the Jewish creed. Shema Israel, Adonai, Eloheinu, Adonai, Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. So when they hear this, when they heard it, yes, it gets their attention. Hear this. As I said, it's an emphatic. Hear this word that I take up over you in lamentation, O house of Israel. Here, Amos steps into the shoes of Jeremiah. Jeremiah, of course, is famous for his Lamentations and his book of Lamentations. This is following in the footsteps of Jeremiah. So another turn of use here. And, other than was what have I done to you? Now he's going to say, okay, Israel. He's going to lament and cry over what's been lost here. So, a lamentation over the house of Israel. And he starts off, fallen no more to rise is the virgin Israel, forsaken on her land with none to raise her up. This is also something that you can look in Jeremiah. I have a whole list. I can't go into all this, but I have a whole list. Jeremiah, Lamentations, use the term or use the concept or the imagery of the virgin Israel and how they have lost their innocence. And they gave up their innocence, their purity. They gave away their purity to these idols. That's why God sees this. If you look at the book of Hosea, God sees this as whoredom. That's what he really says in some of these books. Israel, you're playing the whore because you're going to the wrong God. You're going to these idols. You've lost your innocence. You've lost your purity. So, forsaken, she's forsaken on her land, and none will raise her up. For thus saith the Lord God, the city that went out 1,000 shall have 100 left, and that which went out 100 shall have 10 left to the house of Israel. That's 90% destruction. Not very good odds. For thus saith the Lord to the house of Israel, seek me and live. Do not seek Bethel. Do not enter Gilgal. Don't cross over to Beersheba. It's a long way off, but later on they had a little temple down there too for the idolaters. For Gilgal shall surely go into exile, and Bethel shall come to nothing.
What does exile mean?
Sent away. You're sent away from your land to someplace else. So, yeah, you're banished to someplace. You're exiled. And you don't know where you're going until you get there. And even when you get there, you may not know where you are. So, I like it. Do not seek. Seek me. Don't go to Bethel. Don't go to Gilgal. These are the places that had the golden calves. It's not going to do you any good. Seek the Lord and live, lest he break out like fire in the house of Joseph. Again, this is so reminiscent of Hebrews 12:29. What does that say? Our God is, pardon?
Fire.
Our God is a consuming fire. Not just a fire. He is a consuming fire. And that's what he's saying right here. I'm going to burn you up in the house of Joseph and devour with none to quench it for Bethel. O you who turn justice to wormwood and cast down righteousness to the earth. The wormwood here is a plant. And in the past, I was able to go to a nursery, and I found some people, you might even see it here occasionally. It's kind of a grayish, silvery plant. And you can get wormwood and grow it. It makes a nice little, it'd be interesting to put some in your garden, your border or whatever, as a biblical plant, wormwood. I don't advise it and suggest trying to eat it. It was used medicinally because it's bitter as gall, they used to say. It's just tremendously bitter. And they did, interesting enough, they did take wormwood, mash it up in water, and ferment it. And then they would, now this didn't happen, this is a little bit later as they learned the process of distillation. And from that, they would distill a greenish liquid called absinthe. 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 Absinthe or absinthe. This became in the 1700s, primarily in the 1800s, it became kind of the cool thing for people to try to drink. They actually had little absinthe utensils. You'd have your little glass, and they would put this silver sieve on top of it, and you'd put a sugar cube, and then you would slowly pour the absinthe, this green, some people called it the green devil, but they would pour this over, and then you would get there. Now, they said it would not only give you, it would give you hallucinations. Give you hallucinations. In fact, if you got too much of it, it could make you go off permanently. You could lose your mind. Crazy, yeah. Just say it, that's right. Just say it. They went crazy. So much so that it was outlawed, first in the United States and other places. Now, more recently, they have allowed it to become back because they have been able to control the intensity of it, the strength of it. But it was a very famous drink. I believe Poe used it because we know that Poe probably did use it. In one of his poems, the Raven, he mentions, I think, absinthe and nepenthe. Yes.
The screw tape letters written by C.S. Lewis.
Yes.
Has a character named Wormwood.
Wormwood. Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that.
He's the nephew of Screwtape.
Yeah.
And Screwtape's the devil, if I'm
Right.
right.
Yeah.
And what the book is saying is bitterness. If you're with the devil, bitterness is part of what you're going to experience.
That's right. I'm so glad you mentioned that, Gary. Yeah, wormwood has been used in several different places as a symbol of this bitterness that comes with serving the devil. Serving the devil doesn't bring happiness; it brings bitterness and grief. So I'm glad you mentioned that. Thank you. Okay, any other idea here? And it says, and cast down righteousness to the earth. What he's saying here, if you are through with something maybe outside, I guess the most vivid, which we don't maybe see as much anymore, what did men used to do with their cigarette butts? You know, and put it on the ground and then grind their foot, grind it under. That's the term used here, to grind something under the foot. Because it's to you, it's become worthless. Just like a cigarette butt is no longer usable, you just grind it under your foot. He says you've turned righteousness and you're grinding it into the earth because it's worthless to you.
Didn't have a better way.
Pardon?
Because they didn't have a better way.
Well, God had shown them the better way. They just weren't taking it. They just refused to follow. But again, a very vivid image of how they were treating righteousness to be so worthless. Now, he who made the Pleiades and Orion and turns deep darkness into morning and darkens the day into night, who calls the waters of the sea and pours them out on the surface of the earth. The Lord is his name. Now, little talk about this. This is the Pleiades and Orion are also mentioned in the book of Job. They are important, to them. Today we are afflicted with light pollution. You know what I'm talking about. Now I can remember when I was a kid, we could go out and look up at the stars, even in town, and we could see the host of heaven. The host, the magnitude of the stars. Kayla and I even went so far one time, we went all the way out. Part of our trip, we stopped off and spent a night or two in Death Valley, trying to get away. And even in Death Valley, you had to go to certain spots because in the distance, way off in the distance, you could see a glow of Las Vegas. But there were some places in Death Valley that were dark enough that you could finally look up and you could see the arch of the Milky Way. And it's just, if you haven't done it, you need to go find someplace to do that. Maybe out in the country here, if you have a farm or something, you could find a really dark spot. We've lost something. I had some wonderful teachers growing up in science and things like this, and this one guy, he taught us, we would go out and he taught us all the major constellations. And I don't know where we were the other night, but I was standing there. I guess it was, we had been out to see the fireworks. And it was dark enough in our neighborhood, I was surprised. I looked up and I could see Scorpio. And I thought, I haven't seen Scorpio, which is a summer constellation, in years. And it was like meeting an old friend up there. I didn't look around. I was meant to look around and see if I could find Cassiopeia and some others. But, of course, many of us remember Orion and the belt of Orion and how he's one of the most prominent constellations. Now, these two, the Pleiades, well, the Pleiades and the Orion were important to these people. They were close to nature. They didn't have light pollution. They went out at night and they could see the host of heaven. And remember, God had told them that He had made these as signs of the changing of the seasons. And so what you could do, we don't see, it's very hard for us today to see the Pleiades. It's, in the ancient world, it was a cluster of 7 stars. Now, it overlaps at the end of the Pleiades before Orion comes. They do overlap briefly. Now, the Pleiades come up about, they're at their real great point around September the 21st. And what's that? Pardon? The autumnal equinox. Now, they call the Pleiades the wet sisters. Why? They were heralding something. The rainy season, yes. When they saw the Pleiades reach a certain point, they knew the rains were going to come. They were supposed to anyway. The rains were not going to be far behind. And so that meant you had to get your crop, your summer crop harvested, and you had to get your winter crop in the ground. Now, these were the early rains. The Bible calls them the early rains. So, usually they came between October and December. Now, they're the early rains. We're going to talk about the latter rains in a minute, March to April. So, he's talking about God has set these constellations in the sky as a guide to you. He put them there. Now, Orion, again, famous. And he also mentioned here, Orion points can be seen also with another important constellation, which is up there all the time. It's also mentioned in Job, the Great Bear. And how do we know the Great Bear? Ursa Major. Pardon? The Big Dipper. Yeah, the Big Dipper. The Great Bear. In the ancient world, that's what they called it. The Great Bear and the Little Bear, which is the Small Dipper.
I have seen the Big Dipper.
Oh, most of us have gone out to see the Big Dipper. The Big Dipper, look at it, what we call the handle, that was the bear's tail, I think. So, now, again, there in Job also he mentions this term Mazzaroth, which are the 12 zodiac constellations. They knew them and followed them through the heavens. They weren't supposed to worship them like people do today with astrology, which is ridiculous. But anyway, it's another issue.
But to that point, when they are mentioned, they are not mentioned to be worshipped.
That's right. They're mentioned as guides.
That's right, and they're signs of God.
They're signs of God. God is giving them as directional signals. So now,
Also, if the Big Dipper was turned over, it was going to rain.
okay, it was going to rain. Yeah, that could be said. Okay, now in the Hebrew, the word there for Orion is the burly one. So kind of like the giant. Okay. Best seen between December the 21st and March the 21st. So from the December solstice to the spring equinox. Those are the major periods. And when they saw him reach the height, Pleiades is going down, and what's this called? It's going, well, you could see them together briefly. So it's as if the Pleiades kind of handed over to Orion, and Orion becomes the herald of the next round of rains, which will come about sometime after December the 21st, maybe through March the 21st, somewhere in there. And again, you wanted to get your winter crops up, hopefully, or at least watch them. But you really needed to get everything done before the hot sun came after March and April. You wanted all that taken care of. So the Pleiades and Orion were symbols that they understood. They watched the skies. They could see these natural signals coming up. One of the most famous, it's not mentioned here, I had to check and see, but are you familiar with Sirius, the dog star? Sirius, the dog star. Anybody here? It's going to be coming up right about now, at the very end of July. It was worshipped in ancient Egypt because when they saw the very first night, they could see Sirius on the horizon. They knew that within just a few days what was going to happen. Pardon? No, there's something that's there. What was important to the Egyptians that was so important? The Nile was going to flood. They knew that as soon as they saw Sirius, that within days, the Nile was going to start flooding. It was going to start rising. You had to get everything ready because when the Nile started flooding, you wanted your crop, your land ready, and you wanted everything to prepared to receive the water and hold it. And then as it receded, then you would have a whole new layer of rich dirt soil, moist. Egypt was a breadbasket.
Wonder why we can't tell that now.
Well, we can still see Sirius, but it doesn't mean that much to us.
Wonder why.
Well, we don't have the Nile. We're not worried about the Nile flooding anymore. Pardon now? It's just a bright star. You'll see it. We could see it right about the end of July. It's a bright star in the sky called Sirius. And of course, right now, almost any night, if you look to in the evening, if you look to the west, you'll see what not star, but Venus. But the same thing, if you look in the morning, sometimes you'll see Venus. Oh yeah, it's just very bright. So, but it's a planet, not a star. How do you tell the difference? Here, I'm testing you. Pardon? That's right. Planets don't twinkle. Stars twinkle. Planets don't twinkle.
No asteroid passes in front of it.
Okay. So he's making a very practical statement here, a very profound statement about God. Go to the God who makes these symbols, these signs for you. He has prepared them. He is the one who has done this for you. And then he turns the darkness into morning and darkens the day into night. Again, the day and night sequence. This is another profound idea. He calls the waters of the sea and pours them out on the surface of the earth. They figured that out. That they could see the main weather pattern for that area is clouds would build up over the Mediterranean and then move east. And the well-watered area was that western plain, the plain of Sharon. Because when the clouds, the hills of Israel, that spine of hills that goes down, were tall enough that most of the rain fell there. By the time they got over to Jordan and beyond, it's desert because there's not much rain. It has to be a really big bank of clouds to get over that. The same thing is why we have desert in western United States.
That all of the water runs into the sea.
Yeah, and he will say that too.
It never fills up.
It never fills up. God sent a boundary to it. He set a boundary. So the same thing happens in our nation. Towards the west, we have the snowy mountains, the Sierra Nevada. The water comes off the Pacific. it puts its snow into the mountains, and then it goes on over, and there's nothing, hardly anything left for, Nevada and all that area. It's dry. Same principle. Okay. Going on. The Lord is his name who does all this, who makes destruction flash forth against the strong, so that destruction comes upon the fortress. You can't build something big enough where God can't knock it down. There's so many of the ancient wonders. If you've heard about the 7 wonders of the ancient world, the lighthouse and the Pharaoh's lighthouse in Alexandria, Egypt, the what?
Pyramids.
The pyramids. Especially then the Colossus of Rhodes, and the great temple there at the Temple of Artemis at Ephesus, and all that. Almost all of them except one were destroyed by earthquakes. Earthquakes. The only one left standing is the pyramids. But they were all toppled by earthquakes. So anything man builds, God can knock down. I mean, it's all temporary, people. Okay. And then he goes on and talks about this. This is so great. They hate him who reproves in the gate. They abhor him who speaks the truth. I meant to put the reference here. Paul says something very profound later on to the people he's talking to. He says, have I become your enemy because I tell you the truth? That's what he's saying here. I'm trying to help you, people. I'm trying to help you. But you won't take it. Just like Paul's saying, I'm trying to help you. I'm trying to tell you the truth, but you can't bear it. Have I become your enemy? Sometimes if someone comes up and says something to us, maybe how we'd say it's in the way they present it. All of us could take a little instruction, couldn't we? But most of us don't want to be taken. We don't like taking instruction. You can say, well, I've grown up now. My parents may have instructed me. I may have had, but don't you tell me what to do. And yet, maybe someone could give us an observation or whatever, if it's done in love. They're trying to help us. And we tell them the truth. But we can get mad if someone tells us the truth. Therefore, because you trample on the poor and you exact taxes of grain for him, taxes, if they couldn't pay in cash, they had to pay in kind. You have built houses of hewn stone, but you will not dwell in them. You have planted pleasant vineyards, but you will not drink their wine. For I know how many are your transgressions, how great are your sins. You who afflict the righteous, who take a bribe and turn aside the needy in the gate. Therefore he who is prudent will keep silent in such a time, for it is an evil time. He's saying, okay, you're doing all these things. You're putting all your investments, and you're making these fine houses and fine gardens and all that. It's all going to be gone. It's all going to be laid waste. Because of the way you treat people. You mistreat people. And I think that's one of the things that's most odious if you hear something of a public official and they say he's taken bribes. We just think that's terrible. So you take a bribe and you turn aside the needy. Here comes a needy man who has a problem, but the man he has a problem with pays the judge a bribe, and so the needy man doesn't get any justice. He's just turned aside. Go away. So, your sins are great. And then he goes on this kind of odd advice here. Therefore, he who is prudent, wise, will keep silent at such a time, for it is an evil time. In other words, don't flap your gums, people. no one's listening to you. So just, and that's for something to get that bad, that it's better just to keep your mouth shut than to try to say anything, to try to actually get over anything to these people, because they're not listening. And all they're going to do is get mad at you. So the prudent man just has to keep quiet for his own good sometimes. Seek good and not evil, that you may live. And so the Lord, the God of hosts, will be with you, as you have said, hate evil and love good. Establish justice in the gate. And it may be that the Lord, the host, God of hosts, will be gracious unto the remnant of Joseph. Hate evil. I mean, this is something that's found Romans 12:9. Let love be genuine. Abhor what is evil. Hold fast to what is good. I mean, he's paraphrasing Amos right there. Paraphrasing him. Right out of Amos. Abhor what is evil. Hold fast to what is good. Love one another with brotherly affection.
It's interesting, he says, on the remnant of Joseph.
Uh-huh.
So it's only, is he really just talking about Manasseh?
No. It's like saying, Joseph, the two, Ephraim and Manasseh were one of the two largest tribes. So poetically, they often stood in for the whole. Instead of trying to say, for Ephraim and Manasseh and Asher and Naphtali, he just lumps them all together under these two major tribes.
God is love.
God is love, as it said here. 1 Thessalonians. If I can get this to work. Again. Come on here. 1 Thessalonians 5. But test, 21, but test everything, hold fast to what is good, abstain from every form of evil. So again, the same idea that he repeats there. Okay. You know, he's saying this is so basic. Hate evil, love good. I mean, don't we get that? Hate evil, love good. If we can do that, then God will be with you. God, the host, will be with you. And establish justice in the gate. And it may be that God, the Lord, will spare a remnant. Be gracious to a remnant. A remnant. We'll be talking more about remnant. Yes, sir. In the gate of the city. They didn't have law courts as we had them. And the gate of the city is where I'll include myself in this, the old men, the elders sat in the gate. And the judge, yeah. These were the old men now, the wiser, the elders who had borne the son, they had worked, and now they deserved a little time off. But they would make their way down to the gate, and they would sit there, and people would bring them, disputes, and they would listen, and then they would put their heads together, and then they would come up with who they supported. They were kind of the court system of that day.
How old was old?
And that day and time, probably 50.
Oh, my.
So that's what he's saying, that these people would go to the gate, and that's why they would be turned aside at the gate, because the guy would get there first, and he would pay off the people with bribes and turn them away. You know what? Someday we'll get a chance to study Ruth. That's one of the great verses in Ruth. I love it. They go to the gate, to the old men at the gate, and they talk about, here's the issue, and they come up with a solution. It was a very practical system. You go to the old men who've lived a lot of life, and you tell them the issue, and they think it through and give you what they think is a good judgment.
They thought it was a long
That's right. They thought then it was. Okay, going on. Therefore, thus saith the Lord, the God of hosts, the Lord, in all the squares there shall be wailing, and in the streets they will say, Alas, alas, gnashing of teeth. And they shall call to the farmers out into the fields to come and join the mourning. And to those who are skilled in lamentation, in all the vineyards there shall be wailing, and I will pass through your midst, says the Lord. Now,
And I have written in my Bible, and that's not a source of blessing.
no, we're going to come here in just a second. But by the way, I have to stop on this. Those who are skilled in lamentation, you could hire people to mourn at your funeral to be sure you had somebody there. Now, I've asked this. Do any of the ladies here know how to ululate?
You could hire them to do what?
To mourn. But do any of the ladies here? It's mainly a lady thing to do. Ululate. What is ululation? Anyone know? There's a good word for you. Ululation. Pardon?
She said cry out, and it's that strange thing.
Can anyone here trill an R? No lady here? Can you trill an R? But I have to do it that way. But they trill, they just vibrate their tongue. None of the ladies here can trill an R like that? Yeah. But that's where you hear these people in the Muslim countries, they're like that. That's ululation.
Do you think that's what it was like?
Oh, yeah.
For Israel?
Oh, yes. It's ancient. They had pictures of them doing this in ancient Egypt. We have records in ancient Egypt, them having professional mourners, and you see them, they would yell out this way. It's primarily a lady thing to do, feminine thing, is ululation. So if you see someone ask you, I'm not being, obscene or anything. It sounds funny, ululation, but it's just vibrating the tongue and making that noise of mourning to show your pain and your hurt and feeling. So get these people to come because there's going to be enough mourning to go around. And I've got to get to the next few verses because there's another very important highlight here. Woe to you who desire the day of the Lord. Why would you have the day of the Lord? By the way, this is the beginning of a new section, kind of. It's, he's talked about here. Now it's woe. This launches into another woe. Kind of like the book of Revelation. There's a series of woes in the book of Revelation. Don't seek the day of the Lord. It is darkness, not light. It is as if a man fled from a lion and a bear met him, as he went into his house and leaned his hand against the wall, and a serpent bit him. It is not the day of the Lord darkness and not light, and gloom with no brightness. This is a very ancient concept in in Israel, that the day of the Lord was going to be when God, came or whatever, or sent the Messiah, and everything was just going to be, roses and peaches, and, everything was just going to be wonderful, and Israel was going to rule the world, and everything was going to come Israel's way, and all this, the day of the Lord was just going to be wonderful. And he's saying, not for you.
Well, I think isn't it always pretty much used the day of the Lord as a sense of judgment? It was a time of judgment that God was going to bring on.
Yeah, that's the way it comes to me. Yeah, that's the way God uses it most often. But there was earlier the idea from them that God was going to come and reward them. But now God is turning that around. He says, no, not for you. The day of the Lord is a day of judgment. A day. I like this when it says, go into the house and the serpent bits him. My little note is, you can run, but you can't hide. You can't hide. Jonah found that out, didn't he? You can try to run from God, but his justice is going to catch up with you. So you think you're safe.
God knows everything.
God knows everything. And you can try to hide from him, but you can't get away from him. And then this is great here. I despise your feast. I take no delight in your solemn assemblies. Now, he's talking about those fake assemblies, those in Bethel and Gilgal, or Gilead, Gilgal and all these other places where they were worshiping these calves. And saying, remember we said last week, they were saying that those were Jehovah. That really is what makes him so mad, is that they are using his name for these idols. I despise your feast. I take no delight in your solemn assemblies. Even though you offer me your burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them. And the peace offerings of your fatted animals, I will not look upon them. You're offering it to the wrong God. You're offering it to these idols. It's not coming to me. I'm not looking at them.
Well, not only that, but it seems like it was an outward thing. It was we're bringing this and see what all we're doing.
Yeah.
But their heart wasn't.
Well, good. Yes, another good point. Yeah, they were doing all this outward stuff, but even to their God, even to their golden calf God, it didn't really mean much to them. They were going through the motions. Yes. Take away from me the noise of your songs. To the melody of your harps, I will not listen. The term there, noise, means something that's just, how do we say it today, burdensome? Annoying. Good, thank you. I was looking for that word. It's music that's just annoying, not pleasant. It's just, I don't know about you, but several times, or in fact, sadly, quite often, Ken and I have gone to try to go to a nice restaurant, and they'll have this music, and we would just call them over and say, please tell them to turn the music down low so we can have a conversation. Now, I may be insulting your son back here, but have you been to London? Have you been to London? Oh, you haven't? Okay, well, I can talk then. We took a group of Harding kids. We spent a semester in London, and they just had to go to Hard Rock Cafe. Maybe you've been to a Hard Rock Cafe here in the United States somewhere. If you've been to the Hard Rock Cafe, I just could not. You're trying to get some food to eat, and you can't have a conversation. We were screaming at each other to try to be heard over there because the music was just, pounding in your head. I was thinking, I can't enjoy this food, and you're paying a good price for it, by the way. But anyway, that's what God is saying. I'm not listening to this stuff. This is not pleasant to me. It's annoying. I don't care what you're trying to do. So I'm not going to listen. And then here's the cap right here. But let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Now, again, if you don't have that verse underlined, circled, marked in some way in your Bible, you need to. That's one of the great verses in the entire Bible. Right there. Amos 5:24. But let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. That's what God wants. He doesn't care about all this other frou-fra. And that goes for us too, brothers and sisters. We can go here to this auditorium and we can sing beautiful hymns and we can have a good sermon, but if we're not leaving here and going out and doing something out here that makes a point of who we are, it's worthless. If it's not somehow transforming us beyond just the surface, we're in the same boat they are. If there's no depth to our faith, if there's no depth to our belief. Now, there's one other, I'm going a minute over here, but I wanted to say this too. There's another way of looking at this that seems to be also prevalent in the Hebrew. God is saying, you've done all this, my justice is going to roll down on you. And my righteousness is going to judge you. So there's really two points you could look at here that they should, but really above all is that God's saying, my justice is going to come over you like a flood. My righteousness is going to flow through the land, and you're going to be judged by that righteousness. That's, again, very profound when you look at it and understand it. Okay, thank you. I hope this has been a good class. We had a closing song, a verse, and if you need to take the Lord's Supper, it is prepared in the little room behind us here.